Hey, welcome to a new episode of Skin in the Game. I'm your host, John Simperman, with my co-host,
Tim Elshai. Very happy to be joining you, and always love to talk golf, especially in December.
Yeah, so we're recording this episode here in beautiful Western New York, and there's snow on the ground. So
I had the salt out today.
Yeah, so I thought it was a really good time to take a look back at what a great summer we had, and what we're specifically going to talk about is what a great economic impact that golf has made this past summer, and really excited. We have got two guests joining us here on Skin in the Game. Gina Rizzi, who is the president of Radius Sports Group, as well as Tom Kaplan, who is the president of the New York State Turf Grass Association. They actually just published a study that spoke on what golf does for New York State as far as economic return, as far as jobs, tourism, et cetera, and really the importance of golf to New York State.
Yeah, and it's, John, we see so many economic impact studies over the years on golf. Well, not too many on golf, actually. We're going to come back to that. But over the years, you see them on golf.
This is the first one they've done
on New York State
decade.
since, since 2007, I think we're going to find out, right? But you see economic impact studies on stadiums, on sports teams. You see these, and one, it's always good to dig into the details. Like, that's great. You're making impact.
Well, before you go too far, the reason you see those studies from things like stadiums is there's so much public money going into them.
Yes.
So they need to rationalize that tax investment.
Right.
This is a little different because, we're talking private clubs, we're talking public clubs, many of which are even mom and pops without taxpayer incentives.
I think I got you going there.
You got me going.
I didn't even, sometimes I want to do that, and it doesn't always work. This time, I was going where you were. Yeah. There's a reason you don't see them on golf too much. Golf's a really popular sport.
Yeah.
So on the surface, and that's why when I first saw they did the study, I thought that's great. I wonder what their motivation is, because there's so many people. I'm sitting next to one right now, you, John, who love golf. What is it that they need to, to prove or demonstrate? And I'm sure there are things, but I'm curious, what is it? So. This conversation's a fascinating one because, it turns out while golf's numbers are way up and they're doing great, they want, and this is what we're going to hear, a seat at the table with elected officials, with policymakers who are proposing and in some cases making policies or sending them up the legislative chain that they feel are not going to help those numbers continue.
Right. And before we get to Gina and Tom, there's just a couple of points that I want to make that really reinforce the importance of golf in New York State. First of all, 833 golf courses. I believe we have the fourth most golf courses of any state.
Right.
So that's a big number. And the other number is there's close to 90,000 people employed in the game or the recreational activity of golf in the state. That's a lot of jobs. So we're talking jobs, we're talking tourism, we're talking, tax returns back into our communities. So it's a big deal. And I think hopefully at the end of this conversation, when people drive by a golf course, they see more than just grass and tee boxes.
And either a sport they love or a sport they wish they knew how to play.
But the important thing is whether you're a golfer or not, what golf does in this state has some type of ROI back to everyone, all right? Back to our whole premise of skin in the game, right? Everybody's got skin in the game. In this case, whether you play or not, there's an impact back to the communities.
Yeah. And it's, again, they want a seat at the table with elected officials. And so a question that I'm going to have for them is, knowing how popular golf is, including with politicians who either play it, have, as you'll point out, constituents who play it, or run fundraisers at these clubs, it wouldn't seem like a hard sell, or even a necessary sell, but there's a lot beneath that. So
so stay tuned for our conversation with with Gina Rizzi and Tom Kaplan on a study they just released on the economic impact of golf. But before that, just wanted to touch on a couple of news items. And then one I just wanted to bring up was the launch of a new season of the Women's Professional Hockey League. We've had Amy Shear, their head of business operations, on the show in the past. We've had
Katie Knoll.
We've had a professional women's hockey player on the show. So I just wanted to kind of bring people up to speed. The Seattle Torrents launched at Climate Pledge Arena in Seattle. They actually put 16,000 fans into the building for opening night.
Excellent.
Yeah,
and this is a league that generally expects to draw about half of that.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, they're really built for buildings between 8 and 10,000.
Right.
The league took a little bit of a chance playing in an NHL arena, and happy to report they broke the record of attendance at that game, over 16,000. Everything I heard, everything I saw, the entertainment value was through the roof. So great for the WPHL, and also for our hockey fans out there, both male and female fans of the sport. The WPHL is going to hit the road again this year, and they're looking at Chicago, Detroit, Denver, Dallas, and you'll love this, Tim, Hamilton, Ontario.
Oh, good.
To play some out-of-market games.
I hear there's a good arena in Hamilton, Ontario.
And we did tee that up on our show a few weeks back, and I encourage our listeners to take a listen to the program where we spoke about the Hamilton Arena, and which is TD Coliseum.
Mm-hmm.
But it looks like they're going to, those markets, Hamilton, Dallas, Denver, Chicago, Detroit, are going to get a taste of the women's professional game, and hopefully, with good turnouts, that some of those markets will have expansion.
Yeah, I mean, there's real opportunity for this. I'm glad they picked those markets too. I mean, those are great hockey markets. Not that I need to tell you that, John, but yeah, I mean, the women's professional hockey league's growth already. I mean, just a couple of years in, the trajectory's been impressive. 16,000 people at the opening game for Seattle. Outstanding. They're in a couple of other NHL arenas as well, right? In New Jersey and in
Minnesota.
In Minnesota,
Mm-hmm.
right, where
Mm-hmm.
Katie Knoll, our guest a few months ago, where she plays. If they can start filling, all of these arenas, and not that you don't even have to sell out every game, but just draw, 5 figures, right, and fans from arena to arena. Which I think they can do. And they have really strong marketing in place to do this as well. So, it's just a matter of not even slow growth, but consistent growth.
I really think
they're going to do well.
I really think they're doing it the right way. Slow, organic growth, don't get over leveraged, build the sport. Because, again, this is a league, I should say the women's game has started, stopped, with other incarnations of leagues, but the WPHL I really think is doing it right. They've got the right markets, and looking forward to seeing how their breakaway series goes in a number of those new beta markets.
Well, that's why they put this league together, right? Because there were multiple leagues out there, and I'm simplifying the story a bit, but they came together, essentially formed one league. Do it once, do it right, do it really well.
Right. So, really happy for the women's professional league. But now let's segue to a summer sport, and let's bring on our guests, Gina Rizzi and Tom Kaplan from the New York State Golf Association, as well as Radius Sports Group, to talk about the economic impact of golf in New York State. Stay tuned. Hey, welcome back to Skin in the Game, and thrilled to introduce our two guests from the golf world. We have Gina Rizzi, who is the president of Radius Sports Group, and Tom Kaplan, who has two jobs. One is the president of the New York State Turfgrass Association, as well as the director of golf and grounds at Huntington Country Club. Hey, Gina, Tom, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
So I got to get, how did, Gina, you're on the West Coast a little bit in Nevada. Tom, obviously you're here in New York State. How did the New York State Golf Association, as well as Radius Sports Group, how did you guys connect?
Well,
I had been working in government affairs now for over 10 years. First starting out, as a major at Cornell, plant science. I was really asked to trust. I was really, learning to trust the science and to follow the science. And so that was something that I took with me when I became a golf course superintendent. Even as an assistant, I had a desire to really learn the science and the art of managing golf courses. And so when I became a superintendent and got a little established with my career, I started to see some legislation that was coming out that was doing a pretty big injustice to the turf industry, specifically golf courses. And so I, decided to put my education to good use and start to figure out how I could enlighten the politicians and the public in terms of what the narrative was that was being created. And of course, that's always difficult because the narrative is usually one sided, and that comes from whoever creates the largest amount of noise financially. And that is definitely, what has taken place with a lot of this legislation that's come out. In New York State, we operate as an entity of the turf and ornamental landscape. So the toughest part for golf courses is that we are lumped into a category that is really, as this economic and environmental impact study report shows, we are a huge commodity, but we're lumped in with homeowners, landscapers, and there's no disrespect to that, but we're a major sports revenue driver, and we have legislation coming at us that is tied into your everyday homeowners. So really, as my career progressed on the golf course, so did my career, kind of in advocating for really what's right for golf in New York State. And, I worked with a great group of people, Bob Nielsen and the New York State Turfgrass Association, kind of paying it forward from the likes of Mike Maffei in terms of being able to go after the harmful legislation in New York State. And that starts with our Turfgrass Advocacy Day that we do in Albany every year. We kind of change the narrative from lobbying to advocacy to promoting our industry. We work through a Turfgrass Environmental Stewardship Fund where we go to the state for money for turf research and education. And, from that stemmed a want and a real desire to realize that it was more than the feel good stories surrounding turf and golf courses that would make an impact. We had to go into the economics and the environmental impact. And that's how we tied it into Radius. We reached out, Bob Nielsen and myself reached out to the Golf Course Superintendents Association of America and had some good discussions with them in terms of how best to go about telling our story from a financial and from an economic and environmental impact. And that's how we came across Radius. We looked at Radius and we liked the West Coast feel and the overlap with Colorado, as well as Radius's branding and their marketing, and the elements that Gina and her company put into that study. We felt were far superior to what we had seen in states like Arizona, California, and so that's really how the initiative started from a grassroots campaign, and it went to the New York Golf Foundation and the New York Golf Association. So it was a ambitious endeavor, and it's something that's still not over. But we were happy. I mean, more than thrilled to have partnered with Radius, and we think Gina and her team did an excellent job, producing this report.
Yeah, that's great, and I would echo those. That very great study, and we'll get more into this kind of the specifics of that. But Gina, why don't you just give us a little bit of background on Radius Sports Group and who, in addition to New York State, some of the other clients that you have.
Sure. Yeah. So I founded my company 15 years ago, and our focus is really around sustainability and data driven initiatives and looking at those within the sports industry, primarily golf. And with that, it's important that we're getting for things like the economic and environmental impact reports that we do, not just with New York, but we've worked with Texas, which faces drought issues in terms of water. We work with Colorado, as Tom mentioned, which also faces water quality and water conservation concerns. And then we've worked with, we're going to soon be releasing a report with Wisconsin and Vermont. In addition to that, we do sustainability reporting, corporate social responsibility reporting, case studies. And with all of those, the common thing is that we want to be accurate, we want to be data driven, but we also want to share the information in a way that is meaningful and engaging so that all stakeholders can understand the impacts that are being made. And ultimately, being a sustainability company, we love to see improvement. So as we go, 5 years down the road and do another study, say with Colorado or New York, we look for improvements and helping the states and the various associations within the states within golf establish those baselines and work to kind of continuously improve.
I think that one of the unique things that Gina brought to the business and brings to golf is that she really worked on sustainability outside of golf. And I think that there's something to be said for sustainability in larger, industries, and bringing that knowledge in from, I believe she came from the automotive industry, bringing that in from something like the automotive industry helps to kind of think outside the box. And I think that that really is what has strengthened her company as it relates to golf, is having that sustainability perspective from other areas of expertise.
That's great, and we wanna dig into the findings and look at the numbers and the stories that, that this report is helping you tell. Before we do that, Tom, lay the stage out here for us, though. What was the legislation or the series of legislation that got your attention and had you saying, "Whoa, it is time to do something here"?
Sure. I mean, there have been a number of bills that always come to the surface. I mean, some bills you might be aware of. Most of them you're not, because most of the bills that we deal with in New York State revolve around environmental bills in terms of water quality and protection, chemicals that are being applied as part of a holistic program. And, listen, I have kids in New York State. Okay. I live in New York State. I'm a resident in New York State. I've been a lifelong resident in New York State. To think that I want to do anything as a golf course superintendent and caretaker that would in any way harm the air and water quality in New York State would be something that would be of concern to me, as I had kids that live in the state. So we saw a number of bills that kept coming up, and these bills were concerning. I mean, there are bills out there that want to ban the use of, pesticides on golf courses that would take away Bethpage State Park. And the legislators that make these bills, they don't even realize what the impact of these bills would be until the bills are brought to their attention. So thankfully, they just stay within their committees. The ones that actually make it to the table are the ones that indirectly affect the amount of money that's generated in golf, the amount of money that we take home in our salaries, and the amount of money that the consumer pays to play. And I know, coming from the upstate area, unlike down here, people will travel to play, and price point is a huge thing in the upstate markets. And so I think that's lost in the narrative down here, where we kind of are in like one of these golden age eras of golf on Long Island. But upstate, coming from upstate, I know. I have a dad. He'll drive 30 miles to save $10. That's upstate New York golf.
As we look at these findings, actually, I want to just take a step back, and Tom, you would be closest to this, but Gina, with your data, you may be able to give a kind of a perspective. How is New York State doing? How is the golf industry overall? How are we doing as an industry?
It's doing well. I mean, considering there's 833 golf courses, that number has been pretty unchanged since the last reporting period in 2007. But yet we've seen growth in revenue. We've seen growth in number of golfers. We've seen growth in rounds played. I think New York is fourth in the nation for participation with on-course golfers. There's like 1.6 million golfers in the state. Rounds played, 8.2 million rounds, which is also up over prior years. So the fact that golf, it's not a bunch of new facilities that are being built. It's actually new golfers, and golf tourism has increased. That was a big finding that we found through doing the report. So it is doing well. We could look at, I know Tom can speak firsthand to this, but we can look at, since the pandemic, lifestyle shifts that have happened more toward outdoor recreation, and golf being a big benefactor of that. So we're continuing to see growth in the state, and that is incredibly positive for the industry.
Yeah.
I think Gina brought up a good point. Before the pandemic, I could just speak to the the golf course that I was managing. We were, around 17, 18,000 rounds. And, we've gone to as high as 26,000 rounds and maintained anywhere between 23 and 24,000 rounds of golf. I think the pandemic was one of those examples where we had to come together for the first time as a state group, really led by the golf associations to advocate for golf as a safe leisure activity, in a time when everything was deemed unsafe. And I think that was a defining moment for us, in terms of all the associations coming together. And that was important. And, it's good to see that the momentum of that has sustained itself, and so have the number of golf outings that have increased. And I think there's been a large population of younger kids that are now playing. I mean, my son is 14 years old and all he wants to do is go out on the golf course and play.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
yeah,
there is a program, Youth on Course, which is relatively new to nationwide, but New York is a big participator in that, and it's facilitated through the state golf associations, the Met Golf Association and the New York State Golf Association, where kids can play rounds of golf for $5. So I mean that helps. That helps at a young age, getting kids going, and if the families come out, then you've got more play happening with beginners as adults as well.
yeah,
Yeah,
we've
not
had
only that too, but I just wanted to say too that I think that there's a need and a want, to get some of the populations that live in more urban areas, to get them out into green space areas, even if it's for just field trips. And, we saw that at the launch of the study, and speaking to a couple legislators in the 5 boroughs. And, we would love to pursue avenues in which we could do that. It could come from Rochester, it can come from Buffalo, it can come from Syracuse, it can come from, New York. And, because we can expose them not only to the game of golf, but also to careers in golf. And I think that's important.
right, right. We've had some of the regional leadership from First Tee on the program a few months back, and we're really impressed by what they were doing to, bring more people and more different people, more different backgrounds. And to your point, Tom, more of the folks who may not necessarily live near a golf course onto the course. So hopefully programs like First Tee as well are helping bring new players into the game.
Yeah, the First Tee program is a great program. I think that you can expand on the First Tee program, and you can make it really an all-encompassing program because what people forget and what you have to remind people of is that a golf course is a living, breathing entity. And so the game that you're playing on, is something that has to be managed from a scientific standpoint. And so it can really expand to something where they can understand the scientific component of it. They can understand the sports component of it. They can even understand the hospitality component of it. And that's really what I think would be the ultimate goal of bringing so many associations together would be to do.
Tom, I want to circle back to that point too about the associations. So you said you all came together to advocate for opening it up during COVID. If I got you right, everybody's kind of more or less stuck together. Everybody's still getting along and working together.
Yeah, that's been one of the great benefits of this study is that we are now into another phase, where it's kind of you have a great study and you put it together and you have a booklet and you have a website, and now you have to actually go out and market it and get in front of the right people. And who those people are, I think it's everybody, the legislators, the consumers, the Department of Environmental Conservation, the policymakers. I mean, really, this is a first of its kind study for New York State. We had a study from 2007, I believe. And so we're going off numbers based off 2007. So of course you're going to see an increase in dollars, but then you want to measure that against things like tourism, some of your larger, revenue drivers. And I think we stack up pretty well. So, it's important to now market that study in a unified front. And I think that's where, we're at is that point of let's brand it and let's market it and let's go, tell our story to the people that matter.
Well,
Yeah, and to Tom's point about the first of its kind, the 2007 report did not have the environmental aspects to it. So, to really report out and dig into the data on environmental has been really tremendous, and really getting all of the golf course superintendents associations in the state more involved than in the past when it was just an economic study. So in total, there are 16 different allied associations as part of the Empire State Golf Alliance that came together for this.
We did highlight some of the data early on, but and Gina, I'll lead with you. Kind of the economic impact, kind of the dollars and cents of what golf brings to the state of New York.
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. So we've got two numbers that we look at for that. We've got the direct impact, which is what is spent directly by the industry that goes into the economy, and that's 6.9 billion. So almost $7 billion directly driving the economy from golf. And then you look at the other figure, which is 12.9 billion in total impact or total output. And what that includes is the direct, which we just mentioned, the 6.9 billion, but also indirect and induced. And what that is when you have suppliers that supply to the industry what they are spending in the economy, and then what employees out there are spending in the economy. So it's really that multiplier effect. So those are really huge numbers. And one of the stats that we talk about, which is just an interesting way to think about it, is when you look at that total impact of 12.9 billion, that number is bigger than New York horse racing, craft beverages, and Yankees home games combined. So if you add all those together, they're still not as big as that 12.9 billion in New York golf impact.
In terms of the marketing of this, and I'm going to focus in on policymakers here. So elected officials, the people who work for them, possibly other lobbying groups that are influencing that at policymaking. Let's break it down this way. There's, Tom, is you articulated, there's been legislation out there that would hurt golf courses. That would, I think you had said like Beth
It
Page.
already is hurt. It
is hurt. Okay.
Yes, it is. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, this is where I'm headed, so you can take
Yes.
it from
Good.
here.
Sure.
It's out there hurting golf courses. So what do you most hope for from governments? You need them to kind of, lay off and let you do your thing? Or are there actually policies they could make that would help you build on, and you've got impressive numbers here, help you build on those? So do you need it hands off or do you need more help?
That's a great question. I think what we need is a seat at the table, an independent seat at the table. Right now, it's a tremendous injustice being done to our industry to be tied into, and no offense to the homeowner, but to be tied into the homeowner that's walking into Home Depot and buying a bag of fertilizer and going and putting it out on their lawn. Agriculture does a great job, and rightfully so, because they feed the population and the masses. They have their own carve outs, as they should. I'm certainly not saying that we are agriculture, but we are a large, commodity for New York State. And we do provide. I mean, think about all the competitions we provide, the fundraisers we provide. I would love to see a stat of the number of fundraisers that are hosted on golf courses for legislators. You can't find that anywhere, and I think that those, there's this big push for this New York Community Climate Protection Act, which is a great act. Okay. It's all about clean water, clean air, fully on board. There's some initiatives in there that just aren't realistic right now. By 2005, all buses in New York State are going to be electrified, and I think that that's a great idea, but how are we going to pay for the power? And this gets to a larger point away from golf. But the thing is, when you go and you delve into those pages, what don't you see? You don't see any pictures of the beautiful golf courses in New York State or turf grass or anything along those lines. We are parts of communities. I mean, in New York City, one of the mayoral candidates was trying to take away some of the golf courses. And that created an upheaval. It was in the New York Post. There was comments about it. People underestimate the value of the green space in their communities until that green space is taken away. And golf courses are a vital part of the communities in and around New York State.
Maybe no, go for it. I'll follow up. But go ahead.
I was just going to say there's a host of benefits with the green space that golf courses provide, that Tom was just getting at. And when you're talking about Long Island or New York City, with all the concrete and the buildings and the structures, It amplifies the heat island effect, so it makes it feel warmer than in outlying areas. And the green space helps cool the cities, and the green space helps people get in contact and be in touch with nature, provides wildlife habitat, helps reduce the energy use because it's cooling the cities. So there's more. I mean, it helps with water filtration. When you have just roads and highways, and the water just drains off, you don't have that filtration aspect that you get from the turf grass. So there's so many benefits to it. So I think, when Tom is mentioning golf having a seat at the table, it's really having a two-way dialogue around, what are these benefits that the golf is providing, that is above and beyond what may be just perceived by some as that traditional historic elitist sport. And we
Right.
just talked about all the growth with children and diversity and adaptive golf. And there's just like so much accessibility in the state of New York with all of the public golf courses that there are. So it's not elitist, but some still perceive that. And beyond that, it's also providing these great ecosystem services especially in the really urban areas.
Well, I
Yeah.
think
And
that's
just to
all about.
follow up on one point, I'm sorry, but just to follow
No,
up on one point, I did want to say that I think that the benefit that it has from a mental health standpoint too for kids is very important, and that gets lost. So now I think that having kids, I think one of the best things that you could do was to go outside when you were a kid, and that's a place where I've had field trips at my golf course, and I have the teachers that write back and say that was one of the best field trips of the year, because they're able to come out, they're able to interact, and they're able to learn. And I think that that's tremendous. And like Gina said, that's all we're asking for is really a seat at the table. We have done a tremendous amount of work with our best management practices to demonstrate how we work environmentally to be stewards of the environment on the golf course. And we have to hold ourselves accountable and do those things that we preach, but we also too have to have an acknowledgement from the politicians that we are doing those things and we do want to work with them, not against them.
You know what I'm thinking here, and not to make light of it, because it's. I mean, this is not. There's not lightness in this. There's lightness in playing golf, as long as you're doing well, but not lightness in the topic. But I got to tell you, I'm sitting here thinking every politician I know, and I know a bunch, golf or to your point, end up at golf courses for fundraisers. So I'll be honest, it's a little surprising that you haven't had a seat at the table long before this, because I mean you're offering a service that the vast majority of people in
yeah.
politics partake in some form, right?
Or their constituents do.
Yeah, yeah, for
Right.
sure, for
Right.
sure.
And they want to, and what happens is, see, the basically how it hurts the industry and how it hurts the golfer is a lot of this legislation creates things where we still can get the job done, but it's much more expensive. And it becomes more expensive because these bills gets passed without real science behind them. And that gets carried down to the consumer. So if a $40 golf course becomes a $60 golf course, that's going to make it a little more hesitant for somebody to come out to play. And that is the economic toll that it starts to take on the consumer that gets lost in the bill about some sort of product that controls something that eats at the turf. And when we get right to the table and right to a carve out, there's nobody advocating specifically for golf.
When you're at those tables, I'm sure there's going to be someone who asks some version of this question, and it's an oversimplified one, but it's one that I think a lot of people out there are going to be thinking. So, yeah, there's legislation. I imagine there could be or there will be that might govern or dictate what I can or can't buy at a Home Depot to put on my lawn, because I could go buy chemicals and put them on my lawn that aren't so good for the environment. And so let me just translate that over to a golf course. So you've got an entity that's, hundreds or thousands of times bigger than my lawn. Why shouldn't you follow the same rules? So if somebody says something like that to you, I know, Tom, you've got a response that's based in science and thoughtfulness. Talk us through what the reality is.
Well, the reality is that we have much more advanced technology and we have practices that we put in place that mitigate the effects on, the outside. And so really what we're using, and we're also using, I mean, we have to go through certification processes. We have to get commercial applicators license, and then we follow specific protocols for how things are produced. We have buffer zones around waterways. We are very careful in how we apply. Remember, we're managing big budgets, and there's a cost associated with this. And we're not managing for aesthetics as much as we're managing for performance. And I think that's also a big, that's a big, uh, what's the word I'm looking for?
The
If it,
differentiator.
yes, it's
Yeah,
a
because I'm
big
asking you.
differentiator.
Yeah, and here
Sure.
I'm taking again like a very oversimplified
No, but it's a great question because
comparison,
that's a
but it's
question that we
one,
get.
right? It's one that people are going to wonder.
Absolutely. Right.
So
I would
basically,
not put on my home lawn. Let me just, I can answer it simply because, I've had a house. I would certainly wouldn't put on my home lawn. I would not manage my home lawn as intensely as I manage my golf course. But that doesn't mean that I'm managing the home lawn just with chemicals and the golf course just with chemicals. I'm managing it a number of different ways. I manage it with sand. I manage it with fertilizer. I manage it with, there's agronomic practices that get taken into place that, if I did it on my home lawn, my neighbors will look at me like I'm nuts.
so essentially I mean, well, let me put it, I'm going to back it up and put it a totally different way. You went
Sure.
to an Ivy League school to learn how to do this, right?
Yeah.
So, yes, I mean, the science we're talking about is probably lost understandably on a lot of people, including, by the way, myself. People look at a golf course, it looks nice, it's fun to go play on. Is it fair to say, I mean, the appreciation for what it takes to get a course to that point and keep it there with all the varying factors you've got to deal with is an incredibly complex process. That's what you're saying?
It is a complex process. I mean, it's as simple as soil testing and putting fertilizer down, but it's as complex as managing to maintain an ecosystem that's healthy and safe for the environment. And that's where the complexity comes in. And I think we follow kind of in the shadows of agriculture. What goes on in agriculture has a trickle down effect to golf. And so that's a good thing because in ag, they are, of course, managing for the population, but also managing for a price point. And so when that comes down to our market, we're getting great technology, we're using great technology, and we can be pretty sophisticated in how we manage, which does come down to very, science and data and analytics, which is how I like to manage.
Got it. No, thank you. I appreciate you walking us through that. Gina, I want to throw a quick follow up to you. So it's not going to be a surprise to any of our listeners or viewers in New York that New York State is highly regulated. Like that's well known. You've got a good national view on this. So the challenges that Tom and his colleagues are facing in New York, is this pretty consistent across the country? Does it vary greatly from state to state? What's the national outlook on this?
Yeah, we're seeing it grow. Yes. So you see typically on the West Coast, there's you see it in California generally first, and then it moves across. So yes, we see the types of pressures legislatively, like Colorado is one that we've been working with for a number of years on the best management practices side that Tom was mentioning around all the things that superintendents look at for managing a golf course. And we're talking like, it could be 12 to 15 different kind of segments of management from cultural practices to integrated pest management to nutrient management, water quality and conservation. When superintendents are managing using best management practices, we found that in a state like, say, Colorado, to be able to show the documented best management practices that facilities are using helps with those conversations with legislators. Because in a state like Colorado, they have faced an increased there's been legislation on the table that has timed out, but we'll be back around um, pesticide use being determined on a county or citywide basis rather than through the EPA, just the EPA on a federal basis or even state laws. So using the best management practices and being able to document those is really crucial. And yes, so we've seen that kind of growth of additional legislation nationwide. There's also been stuff around energy and electric equipment as well in other states, and that is seems to be growing as well. It seems to be kind of a when it starts in California, it kind of starts to move across, and so yeah, we continue to see that happening.
Well, I have to believe though, the narrative. I mean, I am seeing younger and a more diverse demographics on the golf courses that I attend or where I play rounds. I do think though the narrative around sustainability really needs to be changed because there is that perception, and maybe that perception, Gina, is when you're flying over Scottsdale or you're flying over Las Vegas, where you see these deserts with the green links, right? And the perception is that, oh, they're using the water, there's droughts, et cetera, et cetera. But I've got to believe, and maybe this is a question for both you and Tom. I mean, New York State, we're in a much better place with the fresh water we have and the terrain that we have. Is that a safe assumption?
We in New York State, yes, I believe that we are, and I believe that what the policymakers are doing is correct. They're trying to protect our water, and rightfully so. The way that they go about protecting our water sometimes is a little baffling. I think you've seen it in the upstate area with some of the shoreline erosion that's taken place. When they started to release water from the St. Lawrence waterways down into the lakes, and I think that the way that they do it down here on Long Island is that we deal with well water. And so the biggest concern with the well water is obviously saltwater intrusion. As you pump down your water underneath the ground, you create areas for salt water to come in. And they regulate us very tightly. But again, here's the problem. There's no regulation for the homeowner, and they're your biggest consumers. So I walk outside, like this morning, I walked outside, it was 32 degrees and I saw 3 people with their home lawn sprinklers on. We haven't run sprinklers on the golf course since October 15th,
Yeah.
and we're
Yeah.
managing to the golf much tighter, the grass.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see it's with water, John, to your question, there's water conservation and there's water quality. And water quality is kind of the bigger concern in the state of New York versus say in Arizona or Nevada or Texas is more water conservation. Water quality is really crucial that the BMPs, like Tom mentioned, around buffer areas and applications of pesticides or nutrients, like that is controlled, measured, that practices are being used other than chemical practices whenever possible. So water quality is important for the state of New York, but when we also talk about water conservation, there are a lot of things that superintendents are doing on that front as well to ensure that, like the systems that are in place for prescriptive irrigation, that are really time managed and managed very well versus a homeowner, like Tom had mentioned earlier too.
Right. And that's where the science of our expertise comes into play. I mean, we are using things such as soil moisture meters that can actually quantify the moisture in the soil. And no longer is it just a feel, it's actually a number that you get, that dictates what you can do and how much water you need. That's a large component. We're starting to I want to use this drone imagery. You put the drone imagery up and it gives you a heat map of the golf course, and it really helps you dial in the stressors on the turf. And these are the things that we just need to do a better job of demonstrating this within the state. And that's our job, and that's the club's job to do that. And that's really where telling your story from a golf course specific, entity comes from. And that's what we really need to do. Every superintendent, every club, should look into these things because this is, we're only as good as we are individually to come together as a whole.
Within the industry, Tom and Gina, you could both speak to this. Is it more contingent on owners of certain types of clubs to do that? I'm just thinking out loud here, but if you're the superintendent of a public course that's funded by taxpayer dollars, ultimately you're reporting into elected officials. I could see, I don't know, where that person might need to think a little differently about how she or he speaks publicly or who they're talking to about this as compared to somebody who's running a private club. So is there a differentiation in the industry on that?
No, that's a great question. I think that it's our job to work within the confines of of the parameters within we work to do the best we can. If we can speak publicly and we can come out and advocate publicly, then we should. If we're confined, then we should stay confined, but it doesn't mean that we can't demonstrate those practices without having to say anything, and it doesn't mean that we can't believe in the things that we do, to to benefit the environment, but also to benefit the dues paying members or the consumers. So I think that there's a balance, and I think we've done a much better job with that balance. It's a question now of, demonstrating that balance and working towards more incorporation of some of these ideas.
Tom just spoke recently at the New York, the Met Public Operators meeting. I don't know if Tom, you want to maybe share any insights from that meeting. You had a lot of people in the room and some stories that people were sharing around. I think there was an upstate course even
Yeah.
that had some good practices in place.
Sure. I've always been amazed at how the golf courses upstate. I mean, most of them, not even so much. I'm not trying to minimize them, but my, would say they're mom and pops, but there's a lot of golf courses where the owner is the chef and the owner's family may be involved in the management of the golf course. And they take a tremendous amount of pride in this. And I think that, if I could have a dream job, I would probably do something like this because I think that it really is something special to have, a 85, 90 acre piece of property that people want to come out and play and that you're taking care of. And so, yes, there is something that's really special about that and important about that that gets lost in, the glitz and glamour of the courses, the bigger name courses, the Oak Hills, the Wingfoots, the Shinnecocks, the big courses down here.
That's great. Well, hey, as we wrap this up, I just want to kind of to talk about, really quickly the future and, would love both your insights on how we continue to grow the game and how we as a state also can drive more economic return back to our community. So, Gina, I'll start with you. What can we all be doing to help grow the game?
Well, I mean, one thing that we didn't talk about was the number of championship events that are hosted in New York State. And I think continuing to be on the forefront of that is critical. And New York is scheduled to be. There were some great announcements that came out around the Ryder Cup, around future PGA championships. And New York has hosted more US Opens and PGA championships than any other state. So
Wow.
that's pretty tremendous. And I think, continuing to be on the forefront with things like that helps to grow the game because it demonstrates that New York is behind the sport of golf and gets people excited about it when activities like that are happening in the state and continues to support jobs too. And the more that you get people working in the industry, the more you're going to get golfers in the people wanting to golf in the industry.
This was one of the greatest benefits of this study. And I think this is what Gina brought in from a national standpoint that ties in so well from a sustainability model is bringing all these different entities together within the game of golf, uniting them, right? And my goal and the goal of the people that involved on the superintendent standpoint was to protect what we can use on a golf course. Because if we protect what we can use on a golf course, it's going to help us do our job better, which is going to keep the money that we're using more efficiently used, which is going to keep the price down for the golfers. But what I found out too was that if our associations came together to actually have some of these demonstrations of what golf courses can actually do for people in terms of employment, in terms of, green space, in terms of the environmental benefits, I think that's probably the greatest takeaway, is, that all encompassing, benefit that a golf course can have, whether it be, like you say, whether it be the public golf course or maybe they're They might not be able to go out and advocate, but they certainly can. Beth Page, for example, right? I don't know if they can advocate at Beth Page, but he does a great job bringing schools in and managing these grounds, and doing these fields with native flowers and native plants and beehives and all these things that, can take place on a golf course. You have 95 to 100 acres of this open green space. Bring those elements in, make them part of the community, make them part of the schools.
Yeah, that's great, and well said. So I want to, Gina and Tom, I want to thank you for enlightening us as well as I know our listeners on the importance of golf, and it's so relevant, Tim, because whether you're a golfer or not, it kind of ties into the whole skin in the game concept because there's a return back to you, whether it's jobs, whether it's tax revenue, whether it's obviously the green space. So thanks for bringing everybody up to speed on that really important study.
Yeah, it's part of every community, and we appreciate you helping people see it a lot deeper. I mean, that speaking for myself too, this conversation was really enlightening, and just in terms of the challenges you're facing, and also what you're bringing to those challenges and to those discussions. So I do hope you find yourself having a seat at those tables from this point on.
Thanks, you.
Guys.
Thank you for hosting this great, meaningful conversation.
Happy to do it.
Thanks for joining us. Thanks again. Don't go away. We'll be right back after this. Hey, welcome back to Skin in the Game. And I really want to thank Gina, Rizzi, and Tom Kaplan for joining us. Tim, I was really interested in kind of the economics of what golf brings to drive tourism and what golf brings to, drive jobs, because that's a big part of what we talk about. But honestly, I didn't think we would go as deep, and I'm glad we did, on really what this means from a legislative standpoint.
Yeah, and when Tom brought up the point about there's legislation out there that's not helpful to us, and I saw that and realized we had to do something about it. I mean, yeah. So the natural question is, what's the legislation, or what are they going after? But yeah, that took this discussion in for me too, an unexpected
and I think
direction.
a very meaningful way, because some cases, I don't want to say we take for granted golf courses and the green space they provide, but something we kind of do. And there's other industries that inflation is hitting them and regulation is hitting them, and you don't think about golf and recreation in general to be those industries that are affected by inflation and cost of goods. But guess what? They are. And I think Tom's point on hey, if we're over-regulated or some of the things we do are prohibited, it's not only going to hurt the golf course, but it's going to hurt the golfer, because those prices or those regulations are going to be actually passed on to the end user.
Right. And I'm glad it's a deeper discussion that requires more voices than, we can have on one episode of this show or any show, right? But I'm very, very glad we dived in on this, because, the question I asked him about, let me simplify this. So if people who own a house with a regular size lawn have to follow some kind of regulations, theoretically, about what chemicals they do or don't use on their lawn, why shouldn't you, as a golf course that has a lawn so much bigger? And, it's a simple question, complicated answer. How do you guide people through that? And, the nuance in what they're dealing with, and it's one, well, we've got, and we're using much different technology. This isn't your backyard, right? And we can buffer. We buffer the water. There's and we heard it. We know. It's complicated. One of my big takeaways on this is we can ask questions in simple ways, but don't think the answers are simple, right? And that goes for legislation too. And it sounds like you and I have been reading these bills that are out there, and most of them don't get past committee. But a bill that might provide an overarching legislation that impacts the entire golf industry, for example, may need a much deeper, more nuanced look. And that's part of getting that seat at the table.
Right.
It's,
Exactly.
Sitting with us and talking to the public is one thing. Sitting with legislators and saying, sir or ma'am, if you do this, the following things could happen. at least opens up that discussion,
yeah.
right? So
Well,
aside of sports, we don't typically think about
yeah,
here.
I mean, Albany has done a lot of good things for the craft beverage industry in New York State, the wine industry in New York
Mhm.
State. Albany, funds a stadium, for
Did they?
professional
They did?
teams. um, and I think we need to look at the recreational venues, in this case, golf courses, the same way because they are driving, again, tourism, they're creating jobs, and, they do need, I do believe they need a seat at the table because, it's a really great differentiator that we have in this region. And I'll also speak to Southern Ontario because they have phenomenal golf courses, in Toronto area and obviously in the Niagara Peninsula. And I just think we can't take those for granted because if you look at other states, and we talked a little bit about Nevada, we talked about Arizona, we talked about landlocked locations like California, they don't have this natural asset of green space and water and beautiful terrain that we have in New York State. So, I really think the Golf Association needs to have that seat in the table. And I think that this study that they've just released that shows the jobs and shows the economic return and shows the amount of money they raise for charity will help get them hopefully one step closer to that seat.
For sure. And, there's another point along those lines, John, that I want to highlight for us here. Said a lot of these courses, I should say, are public courses.
70% of
Right.
the 833 courses are public courses.
Yeah. So when you're driving by, whether you're a golfer or not, when you drive by a golf course, 3 out of every 4 roughly are subsidized or supported by taxpayer dollars, right? So, there's that leads to a lot. One is these are not all private businesses that are existing to make money, right? Some are, many are, and which is great,
Sure.
right? But a lot of these are there for the public good, for the public's access, and also to be available not just to people who can afford to join country clubs and golf in really nice places with really expensive equipment. And, these are designed to get people into the game and give people access to the game.
Right. So again, Gina and Tom, thank you for joining us here in Skin in the Game. And then Tim, I do need to correct you though on my passion for golf. My passion is for a great 5-mile walk in green space in the outdoors.
I'm with you on that.
And then unfortunately, I have to bring a set of clubs with me, and it ruins
Chase
the
a
rest
ball.
of the day. But it's the green space, it's the activity, and again, New York State Golf Association doing a great job, and I just want to close with the fact that they also need to, and they're working to change those perceptions of it being an elitist sport and being only private clubs and again, things like what they're doing and working with First Tee and what we're doing even in this region with groups like Project Play, exposing the sport to more people from more backgrounds is going to be good for the game and just good for people in general.
Yeah, and I mean, before we head out of here, John, I want to highlight a point that Tom made too. I mean, what it can do for people's mental health and sense of well-being. And he was speaking about kids in his reference point. But I think for people, like in pulling people together, it is one of the few things still out there, sports in general, but golf in particular, that can pull people together. Right. No matter where you're coming from
and
or what you're thinking.
Get you off your phone for 3-4 hours, right?
Yeah, you not enough can be said about how important that is.
And in all seriousness, especially for the kids, because we talk about the sport of baseball, and it's much mental because you're out there, kind of by yourself in center field, and you've got to, really it's a mental game as much as physical. And golf's the same way. I mean, you have to keep your composure, and you're off technology for a few hours. That's some real benefits of a sport like golf.
Yeah, I mean, the life skills, the business skills you develop through golf.
Right.
You and I hosted a great episode back in June, July, where we had a handful of golf industry professionals on there, and we got deep into that. So, not that everything has to be educational or personal development. Being pure fun is totally fine. But since the golf industry is asking, first of all, generating a ton of money, but also asking for a lot of support, it's fair to say, okay, what more are you offering? And they're offering a lot.
Right. Well, great conversation, and want to thank our guests for joining us today, and want to thank you for listening and tuning into Skin in the Game. Until next week, thank you very much.